This video is a walkthrough for creating all the screens for a complete React Native login system from scratch. We will create custom reusable components to make the process as fast and as easy as possible. I'm assuming you have React Native set up on your computer already, either using Expo or regular React Native CLI. If you don't, we have set up videos on the channel and I'll put the links in the description. Our journey starts on the command line, so we open a command line tool and create a new app. On the command line, we make use of the cd command to change directory to the location where we want to create our app. Now I'll be using Expo in this video, so I'll make use of Expo init to create the new app. For the template, I'll select the blank one. This might take a while to complete, and you can always pause the video and continue when it is done on your end. With the app creation complete, I want to install a few initial packages that we will need. The first one is Formik and the other one is Styled Components. We will use Formik to handle our form inputs and we'll make use of Styled Components to style our components. So we change directory into our new project and use Expo install for the packages. If you are using the regular React Native CLI, you can use yarn or npm for this. When the installation completes, we want to open our work in the code editor. I'll use VS Code in this tutorial, so I can make use of the code.command to open it. With that open, we can start the app on the command line using Expo start. When the Metro server starts, you can press on D to open this in a browser. This will give us the option to be able to run it on an emulator. Otherwise, you can just scan the code and open it on your Android device. This is all covered in the setup videos in the description. Changing the connection to local, I can run it on an emulator. With the app opened, we start our work in the app.js file. In the file, we get rid of the styles and everything, leaving only the status bar. For the status bar, we'll just leave it in a fragment. The fragment is just the angle brackets. For the status bar, we'll change the style to light, since the color of our work will mostly be dark. Now in the project directory, we create a directory for screens. This will house all the screens in our project. So I'll just right click and choose new folder. And give it the name screens. Now in this directory, the first file we'll create is login. This will be for our login screen. Now in the app.js, we import this login file. So the path for this will be the screens directory and the login file. Now we can put this login below the status bar. This will cause an error to be displayed, but don't worry about it. It will take care of itself as we progress. Back in the login file, we'll create a login component. So we import React and create a simple function for login. Using the arrow function makes it simple and nice. In this, we'll return a fragment for now. Once we are done, we export login as the default of the file. Good. Now this login file will make use of components, that is the items that will be on the login page. So we create a directory and call it components for those things. So once again in the root directory, we'll create another folder for components. In this directory, the first thing we'll create is a colors file. This file will contain an object of all the colors that we want to use in our project. We define them here once so that we don't need to define the colors again. These are colors that I've defined already, so I'll copy and paste them here. These are all the colors, so if you want to have the exact same result, you can pause the video at this point and create all the properties for these colors. With the colors out of the way, we'll create another component file and call it shared.js. As the name implies, this will contain a few properties that will be shared among all our components. The first thing is the height of our status bar. That is the bar that is always on top of our app when it is open. We change the style to light, so we are not going to see it here. So to get that value, we import constants from Expo constants. If you are using regular React Native, you need to install Expo constants for this. For the value, we export it and target the status bar height property of constants. We also need the actual width and height of our screen, and for that, we'll get it from dimensions from React Native. React Native, not React Native Web. This will be similar to the status bar height, so we copy and paste it twice. We change the second one to screen width. And for the value, we make use of dimensions. On dimensions, we call the get method and pass the screen as an argument. On the result, we target the width property. This should do it for the width. So we can actually just copy and paste this and change the value to height. So we paste this and get rid of the last one. So this will be screen height. And for the property, we change it to height. Now we are all set for the shared file. Now the next component on our list is a container. But for this, we might have more than one containers in our project. So we create a directory inside the components directory for containers. Good. So the first container will be our main container. Inside this container, we'll need a component. So let's copy the contents of our login file and paste it here. So we change the name of the component and the export to main container. You can select them both using the Ctrl+D command. Now we bring in the styled components package that we installed. Because we are working with React Native, we target the native version of styled components. So we add a / and native. In addition to this, we bring in our status bar height from our shared file. Also, we need some colors here, so we bring in colors. In this file, we only need our primary color, so we can just destructure it from the colors. Now using the styled component, we create a styled view. Now for the properties, we'll give it a flex of 1 and also a padding of 25 pixels. Now there is a chance that the content in our container will be covered up by the status bar. So for the top, we'll add some more padding and make use of the status bar height that we imported. So we add a padding top property. Now to be safe, we can add some extra 30 pixels. We need the unit at the end as well. Now for the background color, we assign the primary color to it. With that done, we make use of the styled view in the container. So we can copy the name and paste it here. Now to be able to use the container, we need to accept some children. That is all the elements that will be passed to this container when we are using it. So we take in the props parameter. Now in between the styled view, we put the children property. Also, you might receive some extra styling when using this component, so we spread the props on the styled view itself. With that done, this component is ready to be used. So we can go to our login file and use this component. So back in the login file, we import our main container. We can label this as custom component. Now use the main container in the component and refresh the app due to the error. Now the error cleared itself after returning the main container. If yours persists or you still see the white screen, you can just quit the server and start it again using the Expo start. Now for the next step, we want to create another container and call it keyboard avoiding container. What this container will do is that we'll wrap it around our input fields and it will ensure that when the keyboard comes up, it will never cover an input field. Now in this file, we need to make another component setup, so we can go to the main container and copy the content. Back in the keyboard avoiding container, we paste the content and then we change the name of the component and the export to keyboard avoiding container. To implement this component, let's import a few components from React Native. The first one on our list is keyboard avoiding view. We import keyboard, scroll view, pressable, and then platform, all from React Native. Now we don't need the styled components here, so we can get rid of them. Inside the component, the first thing we want to return is the keyboard avoiding view. So we can copy it and replace the component with it. We can also get rid of the props and the children as well. This will have multiple children, so we wrap this in a parenthesis. Yeah, just like so. Now to the keyboard avoiding view, we want to pass a few properties. The first one is style. You want to give this a flex of 1 and also a background color. For the background color, we always want to maintain the color of our main container, so we make this background color transparent. The next property on our list is behavior. This will control how the keyboard avoiding view will behave in order to ensure that the input fields are not covered by the keyboard. For this, there are some predefined values that you can pass to it. On iOS, it is preferred to use padding, and on Android, it is preferred to use height. So to be able to tell which one to apply at any given time, we need to check for the OS, and that is why we brought in the platform from React Native. So using the platform, we target the OS property. First, we check if the OS is iOS. If that is true, we want to return padding. Otherwise, we want to return height. Next, we want to pass a keyboard vertical offset. This value will determine the minimum value of how far away we want the keyboard to be from the input fields. So for this, I'll use 60 pixels just to be safe. Inside the keyboard avoiding view, we want to put our scroll view. For the scroll view as well, we'll pass it one property, and this will be shows vertical scroll indicator. For this, we want to set the value to false. Otherwise, when we use this component, there will be a vertical scroll bar whenever we need to scroll our page. Now inside the scroll view, we'll make use of the pressable. The pressable will enable us to press anywhere on our page and cause an action to be triggered. In this case, when we press anywhere on the page, we want to dismiss our keyboard. So that will be done in the onPress property. So for the function, we'll call the keyboard and target the dismiss property. Just calling the dismiss will do. You don't need to attach any parentheses to it. Now for the content of the pressable, we'll put the children of our component. So this will be the props.children. This is all we need to do for the keyboard avoiding container. So we go back to the login file and import the keyboard avoiding container. In the login file, just below the main container, we make the import. Now we put this container inside the main container. we get an error that you cannot find the variable iOS. I think I forgot to make the iOS a string in the keyboard avoiding container. So let's go back and do that. Yes, the iOS here is supposed to be a string. So we wrap it in quotes. Good. So we can go back to our login file once again. Now the next thing we want to do is to display some text on the login page. So for that, we need to create some text component. So under the components directory, we'll create another directory for text. Once again, text because we might have more than one text component. For the start, we want to create 3 text components. The first one being a small text. So we create a small text file under the text directory. In this file, once again, we need to set up a component. So we can copy the content of our main container once again. Over here, we paste the content and we change the name of the component. Now let's make some changes starting from the top. The first thing is that we will not need the status bar height over here. So we can get rid of this. And also, the color that we need here is the tertiary color and not the primary. So we change the primary to tertiary. Now for the styled view over here, we will not need that. We will need the text instead. So we change it to styled text. And over here, we target a text component instead. Now we don't need any of the properties over here. So we get rid of all of them. Now the first property that we need is a font size. So we put a font size. And for the small text, our font size will be 13 pixels. After that, we need the color. And we'll set the color to the tertiary color that we've brought in here. After that, we want to align the text to the left for the small text. So we set text align to left. Now inside the small text component, we return the styled text instead. So we copy the styled text and replace the styled view with it. Ctrl+D will select both at the same time. And that's all we need to do for the small text. Now we move to the regular size text, and for this, we'll create another file and call it regular text. Since this is another text, it will be very similar to the small text, so we just copy the content of the small text. Over here, we change the name of the component again. And we need to change the export to at the same time. The other things we need to change here are the font size and the text align. For the font size, we'll change it to 15 for the regular text. And for the text align, we want to change it to the center. That should do it for the regular text. Now we'll create another component for the big text. And once again, this will be very similar to what we've done. So we copy the content of the regular text. And then inside the big text, we paste it. We start by changing the name of the component. Change the value to big text. For our big text, we want to change the font size to 30 pixels. And that's all we need to do for the big text. Now let's go back to the login file and use some of our text. Over here, we bring in the regular text component. And in the keyboard avoiding container, we make use of the regular text. For the value, we will put enter your account credentials. I actually prefer my text to be on the left for most of the cases. So let's go back to the text component and change the alignment to the left. So we go to the regular text and change the alignment to the left. And we'll do the same for the big text component. Now back on the login page, we give our regular text some margin at the bottom. And the value will be 25. With that done, we move on to the text input component. So for this, we go back to our components directory and create one for inputs. In this directory, the first one we'll create is the styled text input. In this file, just like we've been doing for all the other components, let's copy the content of the main container and paste it here. And then we change the name of the component to style text input. Now for this component, instead of the styled view that we have over here, we want to return a regular view from React Native. So we import that from React Native. Having that, we replace the return value over here. Now for the styled components, the first one we want to create is the actual text input. So we change the styled view here to input field. And for the actual component to be text input. Now we get rid of the flex property here and also the padding top property. Also I want to bring the background color as the first property. The value of the padding will be 15 pixels. Also when we implement it, we want to put some icons at the left of the text value. So because of that, we increase the padding at the left side. Also for password input fields, we want to put an eye icon on the right side. So because of that, we increase the padding at the right as well. Now we want the input fields to have rounded corners, so we give it a border radius. For the font size of the text in the input field, we want to set it to 16 pixels. Now for the height of the input field as well, we want to set it to 60 pixels. At the top of the input field, we want to give it a margin of 3 pixels. And at the bottom, we want to give it a lot more margin and set the value to 10 pixels. After that, we set the color of the text in the input field to our tertiary color. But this color is not here, so we add it to the colors imported. Now we want to give it a border color and a border width. So for the color, we'll set it to our secondary color. And once again, it's not here, so we bring it in first. And for the width, we set it to 2 pixels. Now to be able to monitor the progress of what we are doing, let's put the input field in the view here and use it on the login page. So we copy the input field and put it in the view. So back on the login page, we import our styled input field. Right below the regular text, we want to put this here. Now actually when we are using the input field, we wrap it in a Formik component, but let's complete the component and come back to handle that. Now back in the styled text input, we'll create another styled component for our left icon. The icon that I said will be on the left side of the input field. For this, it will be a view. The first property that we'll give it is the position property, and we'll set the value to absolute. After that, we want to position it to be 35 pixels from the top. Also from the left, we want to position it to be 15 pixels. Now we want this to always be at the top, so we give it a z-index value of 1. Now at the right side of the icon, just before our text starts, we want to put a border over there. So for that, we give it a border right width of 2 pixels. For the color of the border, we'll set it to our secondary color. Now at the right side of the icon, we want to put some padding so that the border that we just created will stand out. So for that, we give it a padding right of 10 pixels. With that done, we can use the left icon in the view. Now for the actual icon that will be displayed, we want to make use of the material community icons, and we'll get that from Expo vector icons. If you are using regular React Native, there is a package known as React Native vector icons, which you can get it from. So inside the left icon, we'll put this here. Now this will take a few properties, the first one being the name of the icon. But for the name of the icon, since we want this to be really reusable, we'll take it as a property to the style text input. So for that, we'll call it icon and we'll extract it from the properties. So we can get rid of the properties here and extract the icon from it. Now we'll pass the icon to the name property of the icon pack. Secondly, the icon will need a size and we'll set it to 30. After that, we need to give the icon a color and we'll set the color to our accent color. And for this, we will get it from our colors, so let's bring it in. And this status bar height property here will never be used, so let's clear it. Now in addition to the icon we have over here, we want to display a label for the input field at the top on the left. So for that, to make use of our small text component that we've created already. So let's import our small text. So just below the left icon, we'll put our small text. And for the value, we want to get it from the label property, so we extract it from our properties. and then we can pass the label to the small text. We are not done with this yet, but let's pass some properties to the text input to see how it is shaping up. So back on the login page, we want to pass some properties. The first one will be a label, and we'll pass it a value of email address. Also, we can pass it an icon, and the name of the icon we want is email variant. Now for the complete directory of the icons that you can use, you can search for Expo vector icons. So let me quickly demonstrate that. On the first link that comes up, you can click on it. And this will give you a whole list of all the icons that are available in the Expo vector icons. So for the particular one we are using, which is the material community icons, you can come to filter and then check on the box over here to select material community icons. Now all the icons that will be displayed will be material community icons. And the one that I use right now, which is the email variant, can be found over here. Now let's go back to our code. Now let's give it a placeholder value and also a keyboard type. And this will be a random email address. We are not seeing the placeholder yet, but we'll work on it. Also, the keyboard type will be email address. Now let's continue the work in the style text input component. Now in addition to the icon and label properties, we want to take in all other properties into the props value. So we'll spread the props over here. Now we'll take the props once again and spread it on the input field. This will give us a first look at our placeholder value. Now we'll change the color of our placeholder text to light gray. For this, we don't have it imported, so we add it to our colors. And as you can see, our application closed, so we can start it once again. It is over here in the recently opened. Good, we have the color for our placeholder text. Now when an input field is selected, just like what I've done here, we want to change the styling of the input field. In our situation, we want to change the background color. So to do that, we need some form of state which changes whenever our input is selected. So first of all, we'll bring in our useState hook from React. Using the hook, we go to our style text input component and create a state for input background color. For the initial value, we'll set it to the value of the background of our input field. And if we look up here, the value is primary. So we set the initial value to primary. Now using the style property on the input field, we'll set the background color to the input background color over here. This should be in double brackets. And in addition to this, we want to spread any other style properties that we may receive from the props. To prevent any undefined errors, we can put a question mark over here. Now, to be able to change the value of this whenever we click on this, we need to make use of the onFocus and onBlur functions. Now, initially get the functions from the Formik component, and then we come back here to toggle the value based on what we receive. So first, let's go to the login file and use the Formik component. Over here, we start by bringing in Formik. So we import Formik from Formik. Now below the regular text, we'll put Formik there. We'll pass a few properties to Formik, and the first one is initial values. This is a set of values for the input fields that we'll be having. For the login, we'll just have email and password. And the initial values for both will be null. Inside the Formik component here, we want to pass an object. And inside the object here, we have a function which returns all our input fields. Over here, we make use of the fragment to wrap all our input fields. The first one we have is our style text input here, so we copy and paste it. Or actually, we just cut it and paste it. In the function here, we receive a few properties from Formik. So from this, we want to destructure some of them. The first one I want to destructure is the handle change function. Also, we need the handle blur function. Also, we need a handle submit function. And after that, we need the values. And lastly, we need the submitting property. We'll make use of the submit properties later, but for the rest, we'll pass it to the style text input. So for the first one, we'll pass handle change to the onChange text property. And as an argument to this, we'll pass the name of the input field, which is the email. This value must be equal to a property that we've defined over here. After that, we'll use the handle blur. Next, we want to pass a value to the input field. And for the actual value, we'll target the email property of the values. With that done, let's continue our work in the style text input component. So over here, we create custom functions for the onBlur and onFocus. So first, let's create for onBlur. In this function, the first thing we'll do is to call the onBlur property that we received from Formik. So we'll get that from the props property. We'll just call it like so. And right after that, we want to set the value of our input background to primary. This is because onBlur happens when our input field loses focus. So when we enter the input field and leave, we have blurred the input field. Now we'll create a similar one for when our input field is in focus. So we copy and paste this. we change the function name to onFocus. And for the function we call, we'll call the onFocus function. Now for the background color over here, we'll set it to our secondary color. Now to get these functions to work, we'll pass them to the input field we have over here. So for the onBlur function, we'll pass it to the onBlur property. And then we'll do same for the onFocus. Now when we select our input fields, the background should be highlighted. And as you can see, the color changes. And when we leave, it goes back to the default. Now the last thing we need to do here is to handle our password input fields. So for that, it starts in the login file once again. So let's go back to the login file. In the login file, when you have an input field which is a password field, we want to pass an extra property which is its password and set the value to true. So for the text input here, let's copy and paste it. To have some more space between the input fields, let's add a style property and give it some margin at the bottom. And we'll do same for the other field. Now let's change the email properties to password. For the icon, we'll change it to a lock open icon. And for the placeholder, we'll change it to a set of 8 asterisks. Now for the keyboard type, we'll get rid of it. And for the unchanged text, we'll pass the password property instead. And the same for the onBlur property. For the value as well, we'll change it to values.password. Now our last property that we need to pass, which we talked about, is the isPassword property. So for that, we'll pass isPassword and set the value to true. Just like so. Now we'll continue in the text input component. The first thing we need to do here is to destructure the isPassword property. So right after the label, we take in isPassword. What we are going to do with this value is that when we have isPassword, we first want to hide the value of the input field, and also we want to display an icon at the right side of the password field. So for toggling the visibility of the input field, we'll need a state for that. So let's create another state, and for this one, we'll call it hide password. So that will just be below the input background state. So we can just copy and paste it. For the initial value, we'll set it to true. As you can see here, the value for the password field is not hidden yet. So scrolling down to the input field, we'll use the secure text entry property. For this, we want to make a check for the isPassword property. Whenever that is available, we want to pass the hide password property. This should make sure that our password field has hidden input values. Now to be able to toggle the value to be visible or not, we are going to use the icon that we'll put on our right side here. So let's go to the top and create a component for the right icon. This will be similar to the left icon, so we copy and paste it. and we'll change the name of the icon to right icon. But in this case, since we need something that we can click on, we need to change the view here to a touchable opacity. And also, we don't need the border at the right side, so we can get rid of the border properties. Now back to the text input component, we can display the right icon if we have the isPassword property to be true. Once again, we make use of the material community icons here. So we can copy and paste it here. For the name of the icon, we don't expect to receive it as a property, but we want to toggle between two values to show an eye that is closed and an eye that is open. And for that, we'll make use of the hide password here to toggle between those two values. So we make a boolean check for the hide password property. If the value is true, we want to return the eye off icon. Otherwise, we want to return just the eye. Now we can see that the icon is on top of the password. That is because we didn't change the position value of the right icon. So over here, instead of left, we change the value to right. And this should fix it. Good. Now for the size of the icon, we stick to the 30, and for the color, let's change it to the tertiary color. Now using the onPress property, we want to handle when the icon is pressed on. So for that, we'll pass the onPress property to the right icon. For this function, we want to call the setHidePassword method. And for the value, we want to negate the value of the hide password. So if the hide password is true, clicking on the eye icon will set it to false and vice versa. And this can be demonstrated by clicking on it. Yeah, that's good. Now that should do it for the style text input. Now right below our password input field, we want to have a section here which displays our error messages. And for that, we'll create a text component for it and call it message box. So in the text directory, we'll create a component for message box. This will be very similar to the small text component. So we copy the content of the small text component. In the message box, we'll first change the name of the component to message box. After that, we'll change the alignment of the text to the center. Now for the color of the text, we want to toggle between a green and a red color. In our colors, we define this as success and fail. Now to be able to toggle between these values, we expect to receive a success property whenever the message box is used. So in the style text component here, we can make use of the props to extract the success property. Now if the success value is true, we want to return our success color. Otherwise, we want to return our fail color. Now these colors are not here yet, so we import it from the colors. That is all we need to do for this file. So back on the login page, we bring in a message box. Now for using the message box, we need to have a few states. The first one will be the actual message, and the second one will be whether the message is a success message or not. So let's bring in new state from React. For the initial value of the message, we set it to an empty string. Let's copy and paste this for the next state. Now for this, we'll set the initial value to false because most of the time, the messages that will be displayed are error messages and those are not success messages. With that done, we use the message box just below the password field. For the value, we'll put the message there. And if there is nothing in the message, we'll return a string with a white space in it. The white space is very important because it keeps the shape of the message box. If we don't have it and there is no message for the message box, the space for the message box will disappear, and when there is a message, it will appear and the other components will have to move out of the way for the message to be displayed. I hope that makes sense. Now we want to give the message box a margin at the bottom as well, so we can copy that from the text input. Also, we want to pass the success property to it. So we input some message here, we can see how it looks. Now just after the message box, we will need a button. And the button will be a component as well. So in the components directory, we'll create another directory for buttons. The first one that we'll create will be a regular button. So we create a file for that as well. Just like we did for the other files, let's copy the main container content. With that done, we change the name of the component. Now because this is a button, we need something that is pressable. So for the styled view that we have over here, we convert it to a touchable opacity. Now for the properties, we get rid of the flex and also the padding at the top. For the padding we have over here, we change the value to 15 pixels. Also for the background color, we change it to our accent color. And then we can take it from our colors. Now to help this make a bit more of sense, let's change the name to button view. Just like so. Once again, to be able to see the progress of the button, let's import the button on the login page and use it. So back on the login page, we import the regular button. And just below the message, we put the regular button. For the value, we will put login. And we'll handle the other properties later. This error will be cleared in the button. So let's go back to the button component. So over here, we'll need a text component to display the text of our button. So let's import the regular text that we created. Now in the button view, we make use of the regular text. And this will wrap the children property. Now let's continue with the styling of the button view. Next, we want to add a width property and set the value to 100%. After that, we want to give it a justify content of center. This will ensure that the content of it will be in the middle vertically. Also, we align the items to the center. And this will ensure that the content will be in the middle along the horizontal line. Now we want to give it a border radius of 10 pixels. And this will curve the edges a bit. Lastly, we want to give it a height of 60 pixels. This is just for it to match the input fields. Now every button needs a function that will be called whenever it is pressed on. And for this button, we expect to receive that function as a property. So for the onPress property, we will set the value to the onPress property from the props. Also for the color of the text, we want to change it to the primary color. So to do that, we make use of the style property. Now there is a situation here. When we pass a style property outside this regular button component, that is if you call the login button elsewhere and apply some style properties to it, the only component that will be receiving it is the button view here, and the regular text here will not receive any of the properties. So we want to assign a special style property to it, and we'll call it text style. So for this to take effect, we need to convert the style property here to an array. Once we have it like so, we can spread the text style property in addition to the color property that we have over here. The text style should be in an object as well. And now we are good. So at the top, we can get rid of the status bar height over here, and that's all we need to do for the regular button. Now back on the login page, when we click on the button and something is happening in the background, we want to show some form of activity. And to do that, we make use of an activity indicator. So let's import that from React Native. We import this from React Native. Now we scroll down back to where we have our button. Now let's copy and paste our regular button and put the activity indicator in it. We'll give it a size value of small. And we'll give it a color of our primary color. I don't think we have our colors in here yet, so we need to bring in our colors. And we can get the colors from one of the components. When we bring it here, we need to adjust the path to ensure that it is pointing to the right file. And we just need the primary color. Now we can assign the primary color to the activity indicator with no problem. So we can refresh so that we can see what it looks like. Now we have both buttons here, and we need some kind of logic to know when to display each one of them. So to help us do this, Formik comes with this property known as isSubmitting. The value of this changes to true whenever we submit our form, so this can help us here. So whenever isSubmitting is false, we want to display our regular button. Now we can copy and paste this. And then we replace the regular button here with this button that we have over here. Now one important thing we need to do is that we need to disable this button. So for the second one, we need to set disable to true. And we need to negate the submitting of the first one. Also, for our standard login button, we need to handle the onPress property over here. And for the value, we'll pass the handle submit that we received from Formik. That is the value that we received over here. It is a function. With that done, we need to do a few more things. Scrolling back to the top where we have the Formik component, we want to make this a bit easier when we want to connect it to a backend. So in addition to the initial values property, we target an onSubmit property. This will be a function. This function receives a first argument, which is the values from our input field. Also, it receives a set of functions as a second argument, and from this, we want to destructure the setSubmitting function. This is the function that we can use to change the value of the submitting property. Now, based on the values that we have over here, we want to make a quick check to ensure that our input fields are not empty. Whenever that is the case, we want to set a message and set submitting to false. Remember, this is the message that will be displayed by our box over here. In the situation where we have something in our input fields, we want to proceed. And in that case, we want to create a function outside of this Formik component for handling that. Let's say we call that function handle login. And for this function, we'll pass the values and also the setSubmitting function. Right at the top of the return here, we can declare that function. For the function, we can make it an async one. And also for the properties, we expect to receive our values, which we can call our credentials. And then we receive the setSubmitting function. Let's ensure that we get the async correct. Now in this function, we want to open a try-catch block. Now in the try block, when we first enter this, we want to clear any message that we have. So we set our message to null. And right after that, we can make a call to the backend. If the login is successful, we can then move to our next page. And after everything, we want to set submitting to false. In the situation of an error, we want to set a message once again. So we can display something like login failed. And if there is an actual error message, we can concatenate it over here. And once we are done with that, we can set submitting to false again. What we've done here will make it so easy to connect to a backend. Now we can see that when we click on the login over here, we get an error message that all the input fields are supposed to be filled. Now the last thing we'll do on this page is to display links to the sign up page and also the forgot password page. And for the design of this, we don't want to put the big button here. We want to just display some text over here. So for that, we'll need a text that can be pressed on. So let's go to the text component and create a pressable text. To kickstart this, let's copy the content of the regular button. And then we can change the regular button to pressable text. Now, starting from the button view that we have over here, we want to change the name to a styled pressable instead. And also, for the actual components, we want to change this to a pressable. We get rid of all the properties over here and give it a padding vertical of 5 pixels. And also we set align self to center. For the text that is used, we want to change this to the small text. So we import the small text instead. And then we can replace the regular text with the small text. For the style property too, I don't need all this. So I can get rid of the array and just keep the color. And for the color, I'll change the value to the accent color. And now I can get rid of the primary color here, and that should do it for the pressable text. Now back on the login page, we can then bring in the pressable text. Now we just put the pressable text below the regular button. The first one will be new account sign up. And we can copy and paste this. And the second value will be forgot password. Now I want these two values here to be displayed horizontally on the same line. So I'll quickly create another component which I can use to wrap this. This will be a container. So under the containers, I'll create another component. And I'll call this row container. Once again for this, I'll copy the content of the main container. I can then change the name to row container. For the styled view, I can get rid of all the properties here and also get rid of the status bar height. Also, I don't need the color here as well. The first property I'll give my styled view is a flex direction. I'll give this a flex direction of row. After that, I'll justify my content and give it a space between. This will ensure that when it is used, the content will be adjusted and there will be a space between the two texts. Next, I'll align the items to the center. And lastly, I want to give it a margin at the top of 15 pixels. That should do it for the row container. And then we can go back to the login page and import the row container. Now all we need to do is to wrap the row container around our two pressable text. So I can cut the two of them and paste it in the row container. And just like that, our text is looking as we want. Yeah, simple and easy. Now because these pressable texts are essentially buttons, they need onPress properties. So we can put some placeholder onPress functions for them. You can copy and paste this for the second button as well. This basically concludes the work for the login page for now. Now we move to the next page, which is the sign up page. And with the work that we've done on the login page, it should be much easier to create that page. So under the screens directory, we'll create another file for sign up. For the content, we'll first copy the content of the login file and paste it in it. Now to be able to see the output of this, let's go to the app.js file and import the sign up file. So in the app.js, we can just replace the login import here with sign up. Now we can replace the login component here with sign up as well. Good. Now back on the sign up page, we change the name of the component. With that done, let's duplicate our input fields. First, we'll copy and paste the email field. And then we'll do same for the password field. Starting from the top, we'll change the first input field to a full name field. So for the label, we'll change it to full name. And then for the icon, we'll change it to account. Also for the placeholder, we'll change it to a name. For the keyboard type, we will not need it over here. Now for the handle change, we'll pass it full name instead. And also for the umbrella, we pass it full name. Now for the value, we'll change it to full name as well. Now the email field will stay the same, and then we change the second password field. For this, we'll change the label to confirm password. And also for the icon, it will stay the same. Now for the unchanged text, we'll change the name to confirm password. And that will be the same for the umbrella, so we can copy and paste it. And also for the value. Now since we have a lot of input fields on this page, we can decrease the margin at the bottom of each of them to 15 instead. Now for the new values that we introduced, we need to set them in the initial values of Formik. So in addition to email, we add the full name. And also the confirm password. Also in the check for empty fields, we need to add these new values. So once again, we can copy and paste this. After the password, we can bring our all sign and then paste it. Now we can change this to full name and the last one to confirm password. Also, since we have two password fields, we can make a check here to see if they are equal. This will be similar to the first if statement, so we can copy it and paste it. And this will be else if. So over here, we check if they are not equal. So if they are not equal, we set a message that the passwords do not match. And after that, we can set submit into false. Now over here, if everything is okay, we want to handle the sign up. So we change the name of the function to sign up. and also we look for the function and update the name. Now everything will stay the same, and in the catch block we'll change this to sign up field. Now moving to where we have our buttons, we change the button value to sign up. Also, for the links that we have below the button, on the sign up page we'll need just one, and that will be a link to the login page. So we can get rid of one and change the content of the other to point to the sign in page. Now to position this in the center, we can get rid of the row container component. Now we see that the text is a bit too close to the button, so we can give it some vertical padding, and we'll do that through the style property. So in the style, we'll give it a padding vertical of 15 pixels. And now we can see that it looks a lot better. This basically sums up the sign up page. So let's go to the top and get rid of any unused imports. The only unused import we have here is the row container, so we can delete that.